The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and Daniel Crawford read it 3 times before the words actually registered. Margaret Thorne, president of the Riverside Shores HOA, was informing him that his private ferry slip, the one his grandfather built in 1962, the one that predated the neighborhood by 4 decades, was now community property, and he had 72 hours to remove his boat. Daniel set the letter down carefully on his desk at the Northeast River Navigation Authority headquarters, where he'd served as executive director for 15 years. Margaret had no idea who she was threatening, but she was about to find out before we see how a HOA president tried to steal waterfront property from the man who literally controlled every river regulation in 3 counties. Smash that like button and subscribe. This is going to be satisfying. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a career public servant to use every regulation in his arsenal. The confrontation where an entitled HOA president discovered she picked the wrong waterfront property. And the resolution where decades of river law came crashing down on someone who thought community bylaws trumped actual authority. The violation built slowly over 6 months. What started as passive-aggressive comments at HOA meetings escalated into official letters, demands for permits Daniel didn't need, and finally an outrageous claim of ownership over property that had been in his family since before Margaret was born. Daniel had spent his entire career resolving water rights disputes diplomatically, always looking for compromise. But when someone threatened the dock where his grandfather taught him to fish, where he proposed to his wife, where his own children learned to sail, diplomacy ended. And when that person had no idea they were threatening someone who wrote the very regulations governing every inch of waterfront in the region, their ignorance became their downfall. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning when Margaret showed up with a locksmith and 2 board members ready to change the locks on Daniel's boat slip. What she didn't expect was to find Daniel waiting with the county sheriff, 3 river inspectors, and a file folder that would dismantle her entire power structure. The resolution didn't just humble one entitled HOA president. It exposed years of overreach, invalidated dozens of illegal community rules, and reminded everyone that when you threaten someone's property, you better make absolutely certain they don't control the authority you need to exist. Here's exactly how it happened. Daniel Crawford was 52 years old, weathered in the way men who spent their lives on the water always were, with silver threading through dark hair and permanent squint lines from scanning horizons. He'd worked for the Northeast River Navigation Authority for 28 years, the last 15 as executive director, overseeing everything from commercial shipping lanes to private dock permits across 3 counties and 47 miles of navigable waterways. His job meant he knew every regulation, every ordinance, every grandfather clause and legal precedent involving water rights in the region. It also meant he valued order, proper procedure, and respect for established law. He lived in a modest 2-story home on the edge of Riverside Shores, a development built in 2003 around what used to be his family's land. His grandfather sold most of the property but kept 2 acres on the water, including the ferry slip he built by hand using dock pilings from an old steamboat landing. When Daniel inherited it in 1998, that slip became sacred ground. The trouble started small, the way these things always do. Margaret Thorne moved into Riverside Shores 14 months ago, a recent divorcee from the city who'd never lived in a waterfront community and seemed determined to make up for lost time by controlling everything around her. Within 3 months, she was HOA president. Within 6, she was targeting Daniel. It began at a June meeting when she suggested all waterfront owners should contribute to a community dock fund. Daniel politely explained his slip was private property, predating the HOA by decades, and therefore exempt. Margaret's smile tightened. She didn't push that night, but Daniel saw the calculation in her eyes. 4 weeks later, Daniel received his first letter. The HOA was implementing new waterfront appearance standards, and his ferry slip didn't comply. The weathered wood pilings were unsightly. The vintage brass cleats his grandfather installed were non-conforming. He needed to update everything within 60 days or face daily fines. Daniel responded with copies of his property deed, the original 1962 construction permits, and a letter from the county confirming his slip was grandfathered under every current regulation. Margaret sent back a single sentence: HOA bylaws supersede grandfather clauses. Daniel actually laughed. She couldn't possibly believe that the September incident proved she did. Daniel came home from inspecting a new marina construction to find orange violation stickers plastered across his boat slip gate. Unauthorized structure pending review in bold letters across wood his grandfather had carved. His hands shook as he peeled them off. He attended the next HOA meeting and stood to address the board. Margaret cut him off before he finished his first sentence. "Mr. Crawford, your personal property claim doesn't override community standards. This neighborhood has rules." Several board members nodded. Daniel sat down, face burning. He'd never been publicly dismissed like that in his professional life. Then came the certified letter in November, the one that changed everything. Margaret wasn't just demanding compliance anymore. She was claiming ownership. The letter stated that after extensive legal review, the HOA had determined Daniel's Ferry slip occupied community waterfront and was, therefore, common area property. He had 72 hours to remove his boat and belongings. After that, the HOA would secure the area and begin seeking alternative users. Daniel read the letter twice, then walked to his home office and pulled out the master file he kept on all waterfront properties in his jurisdiction. Riverside Shores HOA appeared in 17 different violation reports: unpermitted dock extensions, illegal seawall modifications, storm drain systems dumping directly into the river. Every single one documented, waiting for someone to actually enforce them. Daniel had always believed in working with communities, giving warnings rather than penalties. But if Margaret wanted to play property law games, he'd show her what real authority looked like. He spent the next 2 weeks making calls, reviewing files, and preparing documentation that would turn Margaret's little empire to dust. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright, the November sun turning the river into hammered silver. Daniel stood on his ferry slip at 7:30, coffee in hand waiting. He positioned himself deliberately at the end of the dock where he could see the path from the street. County Sheriff Tom Brennan leaned against the railing beside him, along with 3 inspectors from Daniel's own agency. Each held a clipboard thick with documentation. Daniel had known Tom for 20 years. When he'd explained the situation, Tom had volunteered immediately. "Nobody messes with a man's family property," he'd said. Margaret's white BMW appeared at 8 o'clock sharp, followed by 2 more vehicles. She emerged wearing a burgundy blazer that probably cost more than Daniel's boat trailer, flanked by board members Patricia Chun and Robert Martinez. A locksmith climbed out of the third car, toolbox in hand. Margaret's expression shifted from confident to confused when she saw the reception committee. She recovered quickly, squaring her shoulders as she approached. "Mr. Crawford, I'm here to secure HOA property as outlined in our notice. Please step aside." Daniel set down his coffee. "Good morning, Margaret. Before we go any further, I need to inform you that I'm here in my official capacity as Executive Director of the Northeast River Navigation Authority. These are Inspectors Wallace, Kim, and Suarez. You know Sheriff Brennan." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Your job title doesn't change property law, Daniel. This slip is community." Daniel pulled out the first document. "This is the original 1962 survey showing my grandfather's property. Notice how the boundary extends 200 feet into the water. The developer who built Riverside Shores signed an easement agreement in 2001 specifically exempting this slip. Your HOA's founding documents reference that exemption explicitly on page 47. Would you like to see it?" Patricia Chun stepped forward. "Margaret, maybe we should." Margaret cut her off with a hand gesture. "He's bluffing." Our lawyer reviewed everything. Daniel smiled, the expression holding no warmth whatsoever. Your lawyer, Margaret, is a real estate attorney named Jennifer Walsh. She graduated from law school 6 years ago and has never handled a water rights case. I know because I checked. Would you like to know what else I checked? He pulled out the second document. This is a compliance file on Riverside Shores HOA. Let me read you some highlights. The dock extension at 47 Riverside Drive, unpermitted, violates setback requirements by 18 feet. The seawall modification at the community beach, illegal alteration of natural shoreline, environmental violation. The storm drain system you approved last spring dumps untreated runoff directly into a protected waterway, which is a federal offense. The color drained from Margaret's face. Robert Martinez went pale. Daniel wasn't finished. And then there's your own property, Margaret. The boat lift you installed in August required a permit you never applied for. Your decorative river rock landscaping extends below the high water mark, which is state-owned land. Your private dock lights, not approved by Navigation Authority, potential hazard to marine traffic. Margaret's mouth opened and closed. You're making this up. Sheriff Brennan stepped forward, his badge catching the light. Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Crawford has provided me with documentation of multiple violations. I'm here to ensure this situation doesn't escalate into trespassing or theft. Daniel pulled out the final document, a thick folder bound with a brass clip. This is a comprehensive enforcement order. Every unpermitted structure in Riverside Shores is now under official review. You have 30 days to bring everything into compliance or face fines starting at $500 per day per violation. The community dock needs complete re-permitting. The beach house, built on protected wetland, may need to be removed. And your claim on my ferry slip? He handed her a letter with the state seal. This is from the Attorney General's office. You attempted to seize grandfathered private property using fabricated legal authority. If you ever mention my slip again, I'll pursue charges for harassment and attempted theft. Margaret stood frozen, the papers shaking in her hands. The locksmith had already retreated to his van. Patricia Chun touched Margaret's arm gently. We need to go now. Margaret looked at Daniel one last time, and he saw the moment her power broke. Her shoulders sagged. The entitlement in her eyes crumbled into something that looked like fear. This isn't over, she whispered. Daniel took a step closer. Yes, Margaret. It is? You tried to take something that didn't belong to you from someone who actually understands the law. Go home, resign from the board, and stay away from my property. They left without another word, Margaret's heels clicking rapidly on the dock planks as she fled. Daniel watched them go, then turned to look at his grandfather's ferry slip. The brass cleats gleaming in the morning sun, thought the next 30 days unfolded like dominoes falling. Daniel's enforcement order landed like a bomb in Riverside Shores. Within 48 hours, Margaret Thorne submitted her resignation as HOA president, citing personal reasons. Patricia Chun took over temporarily and immediately called Daniel requesting a meeting. They sat in his office 3 days later, Patricia bringing copies of every permit application the HOA had ever filed. She was an architect, Daniel learned, and had voted against half of Margaret's aggressive projects. She told us you were overreacting to reasonable community standards, Patricia explained, exhausted. She said your grandfather clause was expired. Daniel walked her through the reality of what Margaret had approved. The dock at number 47 belonged to Margaret's friend Susan, extended without permits into a navigation channel. Daniel's inspectors had documented boats having to alter course to avoid it. The seawall modification had destroyed habitat for endangered river turtles. The storm drain system was dumping lawn chemicals directly into the water during every rain. The real twist came during the second week of inspections. Inspector Kim was reviewing the community beach house permits when she discovered something remarkable. The original development agreement included a conservation easement protecting 50 feet of natural shoreline. Margaret had built the beach house directly in that zone, using HOA funds to destroy protected wetland. Patricia went white when Daniel showed her the documentation. We voted to approve that project based on Margaret's assurance that everything was permitted, she said quietly. She showed us documents. Daniel pulled up the file. The documents were real permits, but for a completely different property in a different county. Margaret had falsified the paperwork. That triggered a criminal investigation. By week 3, Margaret was hiring a lawyer, but not for offense. The state environmental agency had joined Daniel's enforcement action. The unpermitted structures would cost over $200,000 to bring into compliance or remove. The HOA's insurance wouldn't cover it because Margaret had proceeded without permits. Homeowners started receiving special assessments. Margaret's house went on the market quietly. Daniel heard through community connections that she was moving back to the city, her waterfront dreams shattered by her own overreach. The resolution came with complications Margaret hadn't anticipated. 6 other homeowners had unpermitted modifications, all approved during her tenure. They had to hire lawyers and engineers. The community dock, which Margaret had expanded using HOA funds without authorization, had to be partially demolished. Riverside Shores faced 18 months of construction, inspections, and legal fees. But Patricia Chun proved to be a competent leader. She worked directly with Daniel's office, obtained proper permits, and rebuilt trust. She also discovered that Margaret had been pocketing 10% of every improvement project through a consulting company she owned. That added fraud charges to the growing list. Daniel's Ferry slip remained untouched, exactly as it had been for 62 years. Margaret's attempt to seize it had been mentioned in the local paper, along with the enforcement action that followed. Daniel received calls from 3 other waterfront property owners who'd been bullied by various HOAs. He helped each one document their grandfather rights and proper legal boundaries. 2 months after the confrontation, Sheriff Brennan stopped by the slip where Daniel was winterizing his boat. Heard Margaret took a plea deal, Tom said, settling against the railing. Community service, restitution, 5 years probation. She's banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Daniel nodded, tightening a cleat cover. Good. Tom watched the river for a moment. You went easy on her, you know. You could have pushed for jail time. Daniel considered that. I just wanted her to understand that power has limits. She learned. That's enough. 3 months later, on a February morning so cold the dock pilings wore ice sleeves, Daniel brought his 14-year-old granddaughter down to the ferry slip for her first sailing lesson. They stood where Daniel's grandfather had stood teaching him the same skills decades ago. His granddaughter ran her hand over the vintage brass cleats, the weathered wood, the history built into every plank. "Grandpa, why did that lady try to take this away?" she asked. Daniel looked out at the river, the water moving eternal and indifferent to human drama. Because she thought community rules were more important than actual law. She thought being in charge meant she could do whatever she wanted. His granddaughter frowned. "But you were more in charge." Daniel smiled. "I was. But more importantly, I knew that authority without respect for law is just bullying. And eventually, bullies meet someone who knows the rules better than they do." They spent the morning on the water, the sun finally breaking through winter clouds. Daniel's boat cutting through water his family had navigated for 3 generations. Margaret Thorne was somewhere in the city, rebuilding a smaller life, learning lessons about humility and boundaries. Riverside Shores was healing, their community stronger for having confronted the corruption Margaret represented. And Daniel Crawford sat at the helm of his grandfather's boat, in his grandfather's slip, teaching his granddaughter the same lessons he'd learned about respect, property, and the long memory of rivers. Justice, he'd discovered, didn't always roar. Sometimes it flowed steady and patient, wearing down obstacles the way water wore down stone. And as he guided the boat back to dock, Daniel knew that some things, family, property, principles were worth defending, no matter who thought they had the authority to take them away, across the country in Boulder, Colorado. A yoga instructor named Melissa Harper was meditating in her backyard when her neighbor demanded she remove her unsightly meditation garden because it violated subdivision aesthetics. Melissa opened her eyes slowly, the same calm she maintained through 15 years as a corporate litigation attorney before she changed careers. "You want to talk about property law?" she asked softly, pulling out her phone with screenshots of his 6 code violations. "Let's talk. But that's a story for another time."